This might come down to our service offering maybe, because we're not of the opinion that you just hire a staff member for a client and then hand them off and that's it. Maybe that's more a perspective thing, but I believe outsourcing actually takes more work initially before it becomes easier and you really reap the benefits of it. So any agency that just thinks, oh, we'll just hire someone and they'll be fine, either hasn't been in business long enough to to figure out that doesn't work, or they've figured out some type of recruitment strategy that we haven't figured out that means you find the right person every single time, and most of that is nearly impossible.
If you are going to partner with somebody offshore, do your due diligence. Ask to see example employment contracts. Make sure that it covers like 13th month pay if you're looking at the Philippines, and it covers the sick leave, vacation leave, that sort of stuff. Just make sure that your people are actually being looked after. Otherwise, if they're not, or you don't confirm that they are, there is a risk that the company providing you with the resource are absolutely creaming margin out of your pockets and the staff just aren't getting paid what they're worth.
This week, again, exciting podcast. I don't know, I feel like they're getting easier. Are you of the same opinion?
Last week's had a very solid flow.
Mm-hmm.
Topic of this week, yeah, it's going to be interesting actually to watch this one in blind. See how we go.
Okay. All right. This week, shock. We're talking about outsourcing and offshoring.
Mm-hmm.
What a shock. What a shock. I feel like we've covered a lot of these things like not in very great detail. There's just been like little comments left here, there and everywhere scattered through the other podcasts.
The outsourcing world is like a really huge space.
Yeah.
And can be quite overwhelming when you're wanting to step into it from a consumer perspective. Where do I go? What region do I look to? What sort of model do I look at? Do I engage with like niche specific providers versus generalist solutions? What benefits should I really care about? Do I go work from home? Do I go in office? Do I go hybrid? What are the pros and cons? Like, it's such a kind of vague space to partake in. But I think, well, it's granted that if you step into it in the right way with solid foundations, it can be massively impactful for the business. Get it wrong and
you'll never do it again.
You're going backwards 6 months. So
yeah, that's a great way to frame it. Well, let's look at it. Regions. I suppose we could probably pull some stereotypes from different regions, what they're good for, what they're not so good for with our experience. So yeah, let's talk about the major regions that outsourcing exists in. So clearly the Philippines, we're a massive proponent of the Philippines. Reason being, huge English speaking country, tertiary education is incredible. Like, we've just found it to be the pinnacle of outsourcing. So yeah, we've also got India. India's been, I think it's probably the first ever hub, I would say. Yeah. It's the OG. India's great. Customer service is big there. IT is probably the biggest consumer in India, or the biggest department that's outsourced into India. So software developers, front-end UI, all that kind of stuff, definitely India. And then we've got some of the newer markets popping up being Latin America. Mm-hmm. So Mexico, Colombia, where else are we seeing? Venezuela, yeah.
Obviously very heavily like Spanish-speaking countries, which service them, service a lot of the US market where they need that dual linguistic capability.
Yep.
It's a big one.
Yep. And then now I'm seeing even the Indo-Pacific starting to join. So Fiji started getting some quite large call centers there. Yeah. So it's starting to spread out. Maybe you could talk to Alex like a little bit about why outsourcing as a model kind of works. Like, what is it leveraging and why? Yeah,
I think the last kind of region to touch on is like that Eastern European. Like, that's really strong. Ukraine, Romania.
True.
Them kind of Slavic countries. Again, from like a critical thinking, very process, task-driven outsourcing. I'd say customer service that isn't kind of vocal. Obviously, because the accent can be quite strong in those regions. But yeah, that's a massively growing hub.
Yeah. We could talk about, I think, if you are looking at outsourcing or hiring offshore talent, it would be good to kind of talk about pros and cons in each region and what we've seen and notice watching the macro environment of outsourcing grow. So Philippines is a strong hub, I find, because of the English. I think that is point number one, is English is so widely spoken. It is more a it's more a level of English, rather than do they speak English. So that's been a huge benefit to the Philippines. India's great because it's been there for so long, and they really do kind of focus on that tech side.
They've also got 1.5 billion people.
So quite a big talent pool.
Massive talent pool, massive competition for roles, essentially, which naturally drives the quality of talent through the roof. Just a quick kind of touch, like I'd say Philippines is probably the most expensive hub to outsource in, predominantly. India is definitely cheaper. Sacrifice on that comms piece, but it just kind of depends what you're looking for.
Latin America it's great for US because of the time zone. That's what I find. India can be quite difficult. I found it be a really difficult time zone to support any kind of multinational or over any kind of 2 different time zones. It's quite difficult. For New Zealand, I think it's 8 hours behind, which is that is really tricky. It's a little bit easier for maybe Australia or West Coast Australia, but even then, so that's quite difficult. But then you see Latin America be perfect for the US and their time zone. So sometimes it is a kind of a time zone question. But then again, with any growing market, it's the businesses behind it that are driving the movement forward, and we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to this. So why don't you share us the story of how we even got into like how we even stepped foot in?
Yeah, this is quite a sensitive topic because you don't want to go start bagging out companies and experiences, and specifically, I think, because on the off chance that certain people start to listen. Our initial experience, or 2 experiences with outsourcing, one of them was definitely bad actor. The other one just wasn't a great fit. And that was, we went to India first. We struggled with the time zone. We struggled with the communication. Got referred to somebody in the Philippines, which initially was a great experience. And then we became a victim of, I guess, this whole bad actor perception, in that the personnel that we were partnered with was awesome. And the skill set was solid. Communication from him specifically was really good, but from a company sitting behind the scenes wasn't great. And I distinctly remember like it was during that COVID period, we got pushed into a bit of a corner to commit to this guy full time, not having full time work to give him, or we'd lose him completely, like they were going to sack him. And I think that was the first red flag, from like an ethics perspective, is that really how you treat people. This guy's got family to support, look after. Us committing to him kind of puts our business under pressure because we've not got the revenue to service him being full time. And so that was like the first red flag. And after a bit of deliberation, we opted to go a different pathway and kind of set up on our own. And that's when we discovered a bit of a second red flag, or a second kind of nuance of these bad actors, was that they were very much a profit first business, whereas we run people first with our offshoring. Obviously you need profit to exist, but putting the needs of your people first, that just elevates the experience of the customer. And it turned out that we were paying for him full time, maybe 3 or 4 of the clients that he was servicing, which the sad thing to that is this is very prevalent within the outsourcing industry, because you're dealing with such big difference in time zones, like just geographical distance. You're dealing with, different tech stacks and different levels of intimacy, and companies that choose to do that can get away with it more often than not, which is great for them, but it sucks for the talent that's stuck in the middle, working 70 hours a week, as well as commuting 20 hours a week. And it sucks for the client that's paying for it, because they're not getting somebody's like sole attention into their own business, and thus just creates a shitty experience, gives outsourcing a bad name, and then leaves chums like us to pick up the pieces
and try and fix the perception in the market.
Yeah, bad actor perspective like that. That was a long-winded story, but profit over people is a massive red flag results in talent getting burnt out, results in poor performance, poor deliverables, results in frustrated clients, results in bad rep for the industry. When, if done the right way, it can be a massive tool that you can leverage to launch things forward. So, yeah, that's just my short story of a bad actor that we've experienced. Are you familiar with any other kind of stories?
I remember sitting in that group of agency owners, and a guy jumps in there, clearly fresh to the game, and starts talking about, he was like, oh, how do you guys pay your staff in the Philippines? I'm just thinking about setting up a Wise account and paying them. And you had these, now to people listening, that doesn't seem like a bad thing, but what it alluded to was the world, right? In the Philippines, there are very, very strict labor laws. There are very, very strict payroll processes. There are numerous government benefits. There are, you need a Philippines bank account to remit funds to some of these government agencies. They won't receive them from, just any bank account. And you need resource to be able to do that. So when he was coming in and saying, how do you guys pay your staff? What it alluded to in the group that he was in was that he was basically just contracting people out. And that is also kind of a big red flag, is what employment term are these employees going to be on? People can, and it's so easy to do and not to know on the consumer side, not to know. But you would never, and you would never know unless you ask the question. Just hiring contractors and paying them and not doing any of their, government benefits or providing medical insurance or anything like that. And we've actually had staff in leadership positions join AMPT because their company that they were previously in were participating in stuff like this. One of our client success managers, saw the writing on the wall and was like, okay, this is not good, and moved on because of the ethics of it, and people who are consuming outsourcing services or offshoring or have offshore staff need to remember that Philippines especially, or any of these countries, they know, like, the government knows the country the best, and there are these protections, albeit not as great as the Western world or not as easy to administer as the Western world, but they do have these government contributions that we have to pay into for things like social security and things like, medical insurance and things like that. And if you're just paying as a contractor, sometimes these companies are not doing what the Western world would do, which is pay them a little bit more so that they can do it themselves. They're paying them less. And that kind of causes a bit of an imbalance, I suppose. That was a story that was, and it caused a ruckus in that group. It was, the WhatsApp group was just going off. Like, What do you mean? Like, it was huge. So yeah, that was a story. So
I think it's a great time to put the listener in the spotlight for being negligent.
The listener?
Yeah. So what I was going to allude to is, over the last 5 years, how many times have you been on the receiving end of a question from somebody who's just signed a proposal around wanting to see employment contracts, around wanting to see leave policies, around wanting to see, night premium rates? Like, how many times has that happened in the last 5 years where a client has done what you would deem to be like sufficient due diligence on who they're about to partner with? I could probably count on my left hand using 3 fingers the number of times that's actually happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting because the first time that it did happen, I was like,
okay,
like, we've actually got to present something meaningful here. Not that we didn't have it in the background, because we went through the pain of like 18 months setting up a proper entity in the Philippines, but it had never happened before. So it wasn't just to hand. And thankfully, like, we've come through each of those requests, with no action points or no questioning or anything like that. But it just goes to show that people lack that attention to detail when it comes to, I guess, just kind of like committing to commercial agreements, really. think we're all guilty of it at some stage. We don't read the fine print. We don't read the stuff that really matters and has a big impact if things do go wrong. So yeah, that'd be one encouragement from me to listeners is if you are going to partner with somebody offshore, do your due diligence, ask to see example employment contracts, make sure that it covers like 13th month pay if you're looking at the Philippines, and it covers the sick leave, vacation leave, it covers, the HMO opt-in and that sort of stuff. Just make sure that your people are actually being looked after. Otherwise, if they're not, or you don't confirm that they are, there is a risk that the company providing you with the resource are absolutely creaming margin out of your pockets, and the staff just aren't getting paid what they're worth.
And churn. Churn's obviously the other one.
Yeah. You spend all that time onboarding and training, then 3 months in, talent realizes that this is not a good deal for them, and you're back to square one. So
the other red flag that I would allude to is not having a point of contact inside the company, or it being the person that sold the contract. That would be another major red flag. Something that because sometimes you need support in bridging that gap, that cultural gap, right? And if you don't have that point of contact who understands the difference between the Western world and your outsourcing location, and you can't get a hold of them, or they're not available, they're not trying to book meetings with you to check in on your experience, you have an issue. Because again, this might come down to our service offering maybe, because we're not of the opinion that you just hire a staff member for a client and then hand them off and that's it. Maybe that's more a perspective thing in our service offering. But I believe outsourcing actually takes more work initially before it becomes easier and you really reap the benefits of it. So any agency that just thinks, we'll just hire someone and they'll be fine, either hasn't been in business long enough to to figure out that doesn't work, or they've figured out some type of recruitment strategy that we haven't figured out. That means you find the right person every single time, and most of that is nearly impossible. So it would be another major red flag.
I'm just trying to rack my brain on a couple of others that we've not personally experienced, but we have become aware of, and that's what other people do in the industry. And probably most of this credit goes to our ops manager in the Philippines, because he's kind of on the ball with practices that are carried out. And that's just with like companies that aren't super transparent with pricing and like what costs contribute to the final price point. And it's where companies will, build in operating margin around, salary cost, or they will include like equipment leasing for your headcount, which has margin built into it. And, and I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. There should be a benefit to you procuring equipment and then renting it back to whoever's, there definitely should be, but for me, it's about being transparent around what that is. Because what often comes up is like, from clients or potential clients is how much of what we're paying actually goes back to the staff member. And I think people are socially aware that they don't want to partake in people getting ripped off. So credit for asking the question. It's more so, I think, on the suppliers of the industry, just leading with transparency.
I suppose the ethics around it could be an interesting topic in itself, because, there could be a belief out there that you're ripping people off, or you're just making margin on people's salary. But it's important to maybe allude to and bring up and shine light on what an agency actually does for the client when it comes to this kind of like an offshoring agreement. Because, you look at the companies like Deal or Pilot. I think Bezos has invested in Pilot. And you look at there's multiple other platforms for global hiring, right? To make sure everyone's compliant with, regulations and stuff like that. And the fees that they charge alone just to have an employee in another country sometimes surpass what we charge as a margin in between, salary and the client, to fully manage the staff member, make sure they've got equipment, have regular check-ins on their performance and all that kind of stuff. I think it's crazy to, a company acting as an employee of record versus the service offering that we provide, or that the offshoring industry is kind of built to provide.
Yeah.
is sometimes crazy. So I think it could be cool to talk about that. So, and again, there's bad actors here, but it's what for you, I suppose, Alex, what do you see the role of the agency playing in an offshoring contract, I suppose?
I think there's a few things. I think it all starts with the talent attraction piece. The world of offshore labor is such a noisy, big, vast space. The majority of the people that look to hire offshore, and they look initially, I think, will try to do it direct, going on to the likes of Fiverr or Upwork and trying to find a contractor. And there are two main issues with that. The one is the time and energy you need to screen, have meaningful conversations, partner with somebody on one of those platforms. And then the second thing that comes up then is actually the time and effort required to onboard, to have them mold into how you operate, to have this person who is used to just contracting and kind of having flexibility tied into just one service offering. I think the energy to maintain that and police it to some degree is often overlooked. And ultimately then, because they are just contracting, you don't really have any continuity with service. Like they can open, they can leave, they can work with 6 other clients and you've got zero control over that. So I think that's quite an impactful distinction to make. And a lot of the conversations that we have, people have had experience of doing that. And that's the reason that they're talking to us now, is because they know how troublesome that space can be. So there's a talent attraction piece. And then I think a couple of episodes ago, we spoke about, traditional hiring, how much time and energy it takes for management to actually hire somebody in-house in a role. And, it's roughly around 30 to 35 hours. Our process, we get 3 shit-hot candidates and it takes roughly 2 hours of your time. That's collaboration stuff. That's 3 final interviews with 3 really good fits for the business. You're almost 10x saving time required to get headcount in play. So yeah, I think from an agency perspective, like we obviously lead with that. That's really our massive selling point, is that we will get really good talent in a fraction of the time it takes. And then the other side too, I think, that is often overlooked from what impact do the agency have, is that talent retention piece. Once you go live, our majority of our surplus goes into keeping staff engaged. Everybody's working from home. It can be quite a lonely place. So making sure that the team are engaged, morale's high, there is a family that they can buy into locally in the Philippines versus just working with the clients, staff that could be in Australia, New Zealand, US, you name it, all over the show, Canada, and you don't really get any solid face time with them. Obviously, we've got dedicated customer support staff that look at productivity and ensure that what you're paying for, you actually receive by way of time, energy, effort, output. So there's this massive kind of like staff management piece that sits in the middle that the client definitely doesn't have the time and energy to do. And if you don't have it present, you're constantly replacing staff that churn.
Or you can't access the benefits of offshoring, because you can't manage the staff to get the output. So without the agency, you can't really access the upside, I suppose.
And then like culturally, there are differences between the Philippines and the US, the UK, New Zealand, albeit they have a heavily Western influence. There is still a natural cultural shift. And it's, being able to communicate and engage with that can be quite challenging at times. We've seen it firsthand over the last 5 years. We still have team members that won't open up to me and you on a call, but they will to our internal team.
Yeah.
And if you've not got anybody to facilitate that exchange, you're completely in the dark, and your team can leave and you would never have picked up on the red flags or like the pending issues, etc. And I think, there's this piece in the middle that is massively overlooked from the agency side and what impact that has. And on my other monitor, I've got deal employer of record service fee that starts at $500 USD a month. And I compare that to the margin that we make on an average seat. And I think we're about 4 times underpriced, I reckon. Holy.
And that's just for a platform, right? Which we'll eventually have.
Yeah, and obviously they have no kind of performance management piece in there. They don't do any intimate things. They don't do the meetups. They don't manage and track performance. They don't pool talent for replacement headcount. They don't do any of that stuff. It's just hey, this person is now legally employed by you guys, and here's a ticket for doing so.
And they charge you months and months of salary up front, right? I think it's like, isn't it like 2 months bond or something ridiculous like that?
Yeah. Starting to think that it's a way more palatable business model.
Yeah, maybe we should transition. Maybe we've just figured out the next move. No, it's so true. It's you touched on such good points there. Like, the agency plays such a pivotal role, but maybe on the consumer side, it just looks like we sit there and make margin. Maybe that's why people try and go to Fiverr and think that it's easier that way, but long term, it's not.
Yeah, I think everybody before they that wasn't the right line. I think people experiencing the pain of trying to go direct and filter out all the shit in the process will find like a newfound respect for having an agency actually help you find really good talent and keep it. But it's like you can't throw that people down. You can't throw that down people's necks. I think they've got to experience that for themselves to be like, oh yeah, get it. You do have other thinkers that don't want to bother. They see the hassle with that side and they come direct to us, which is fine. And then we've also seen people, like, we've got on calls with them and what we do isn't a good fit. And I have actively encouraged them to go and look at the likes of Fiverr and Upwork because they don't really need full-time staff. They actually don't really need, like, they don't really know what they want. But they know they don't want a full-time person. So I will ship them off to them kind of like contractor-based sites. With a slight smile, knowing that they're about to just enroll into a shitstorm of...
Yeah, I mean, I remember posting jobs on Upwork more because we had the need for, a Salesforce developer for a quick project. I think that's more the space. But even then, you put the job ad out, you get 100 posts back going, I can do this, look at all my accreditations. And I'm like, this is what recruiters feel like every single day, sitting here. Like, how do you know what accreditations versus what, like, they've all got the same Salesforce certificates. Like, how do I know who can do what? I think people can also be successful hiring directly some of the times, until they want 2 or 3 staff. And then you realize how difficult it is to manage a team versus manage one staff member. And that's where that kind of team performance element as well comes into what an agency supports the staff, the client with managing, I suppose. Yeah. Having 1 or 2 staff in different departments, fine, easy, right? Different leaders, different whatever. Having 5 staff run finance, very, very, very different. And we've learned that somewhat from the book of Hard Knocks, but we've learned it nonetheless, right?
It's really hard to share clients' opinions of us, isn't it? Without them sharing direct.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about good actors, obviously there's only us to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Peanuts in the grand scheme.
Maybe we do a bit of role playing, like you pretend to be one of our clients.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so Mr. Head of Finance.
Yep.
How have you found working with a team of 4 offshore in the Philippines? What's been like a massive green flag?
Well, the fact that you're on this call, client success manager, who's been great in emailing me and communications. It's been interesting, I suppose, growing with the team and having members, take up leadership positions and manage staff has been a huge efficiency gain. The biggest efficiency gain we've actually seen is having staff be able to support multiple locations, because we're a large multinational entity who have departments in lots of locations, which require different time zones. So having staff be able to, work different shifts and support North America and maybe also locations in Europe and also in the Southern Hemisphere is really, really helpful, because we have a lot of complex processes, a bit of an aging tech stack, and some of these things require urgent action for things to move to customers quickly. So it's been quite good. Our team leader is doing really well. Sometimes they take the burden on the team's performance a little bit too much and need to learn to manage the team and manage the expectations of the team rather than just jumping in and doing it. But it's been great to work with her for the last 4 years and see them grow into this position.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Head of Finance. It's easy to speak about bad actors because we've had horrific experiences sometimes.
And heard some awful experience. Like, even from our staff, hearing about some some of the stuff that the agencies pulled on our staff member is just can't even be mentioned. Like, it's that bad. But again, you're always going to have them. One point I do like on the docket that we haven't talked about is like the potential risks. I think it's very easy to prop the industry up and go, oh, it's amazing, just hire everyone offshore. But there are risks, right? Like, I think risk number one is a mindset risk, thinking that it's going to be easier just to outsource and hire offshore. Then I touched on this in a previous episode where I heard of a client who came in and, hired someone and spent no time onboarding them, thought they'd be, perfect from day one. And, it just didn't work out. And, where else can you do that in the business with any employee that you hire? Spend no time onboarding them, give them no process or systems or expectations and expect that to work. So I think the risk sometimes is this belief that because the process to hire them was so easy and somewhat cost efficient, that it's going to be easy to onboard them. But I would say that onboarding piece is somewhat harder because they are offshore. So I'd say that's risk number one. Risk number two for me is not having internal leadership bought into the process.
Yeah. Yeah. If you come up against any level of resistance between internal team and offshore team, then you're doomed to fail. And we've had this crop up actually in client businesses where most influential leader has made the choice to go offshore with staff. And then their subordinate, like that middle tier management, hasn't been involved in the process, yet they are responsible for the output of the offshore staff. And there have been massive conflicts when it comes to communication styles, when it comes to not having aligned expectations because they haven't been a part of the kickoff process. And, it kind of puts your leadership onshore in a strange predicament because they've put the neck on the line to commit to an offshoring partner. Then they've got an onshore team member who is highly influential because they obviously, may have customer facing role, etc., who aren't fully bought in. They're not happy. They're becoming frustrated. So then do you rearrange what onshore looks like, or do you cut the tie with the offshore? Then you're back to square one with not having the resource to deliver for onshore client, demand and that sort of stuff. And it becomes this kind of toxic cycle. And yeah, in our experience, like we've raised it, there has been some, I guess, training or adoption mechanism onshore with said onshore staff, which has improved the relationship with the offshore team. But it could quite easily have gone the other way. And that only happened once we had a few casualties in the offshore team, i.e. them saying like, F this, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm leaving. So yeah, it's absolutely critical that your onshore team, who are going to be involved with your offshore team, whether it be by way of management, daily interaction, relying on them for output, are bought in like from day one. Like they attend that collaboration call, they attend them interviews with staff, they attend the kickoff call. Like it is so critical that they're part of that process.
I think the interview one's a big one as well. Like we say to people, or I say to them on sales calls, like, those interviews, I recommend you be there, whoever the economic buyer is, whoever's signing the contract, but also anyone that's going to be managing the staff member or not interacting, but if they're going to be in the team or like whatever, I would just recommend them being there or at least listening to the recording and having an input on it just from a psychological front. It just makes them feel like they've impacted that decision in some way. So yeah, I think that's a big risk. And the last risk is, for me, not knowing where the staff member is going to fit into the org or this team fits into the org exactly, and just thinking that this person is going to sit out on this limb and just produce an output and not actually be integrated into the team. That can be a bit of a massive risk. Like we always want to know where the staff member is going to be, who they're going to report to in the client company, who will manage their performance from our side as well. And yeah, make sure and everything else above that, make sure the team's fully bought in, that they like their manager and all that kind of stuff. Like that is also key. If they're going to sit without a reporting line, without a home in the org, then it's up to doom straight away.
One fleeting risk that came to mind in theme with relying too heavily on outsourcing. I think that that only occurs when you don't have the structure in place, or you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the processes, that you don't have the systems, and your reliance is on the person, not the process. Because the moment that the person isn't present, i.e. they're sick, they're on leave, they decide to take another opportunity, which does happen, let's not beat around the bush, like it does happen, if everything falls over.
But then again, that's also true internally, right?
Yeah.
Like if you've got a single point of failure for your AP department and it's one person and they decide to fall over, like it's the same. I think the same risks exist onshore and offshore when it comes to staff and process.
Yeah. I don't know if there's like this perceived kind of reduced level of risk though with it being onshore. If you're, say like your AP person falls over in the office, like somebody can physically come in and like try to be useful from health and safety, or I'm not sure, like I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Yeah.
When it's like a reliance on cloud-based, remote, systems-based stuff, it's way harder just to plug somebody into that piece. And it often comes back to the decision maker who commit to offshoring to kind of pick up the pieces, get back into the weeds, because they're the only person that knows the process that this person is supposed to be following, because it hasn't been kind of like constructed into a playbook per se. So yeah, I'd say that's a pretty big risk.
Yeah. Just single source of failure kind of point of risk. Cool. I think we've touched on some good topics there. I think we can kind of wrap up. I'm probably going to chuck a shameless plug in here. You know, obviously listeners, if you're out there and you're in the space that you know you need to hire, or you've got a deficiency in a department or an output that you're not an output that you need inside a team that you're just not receiving, or a level of expertise that you need to hire for, be that finance, graphics, customer service, virtual assistants, you know, whatever that might be. Probably the easiest way to reach out to us is by email. So josh@ampedhq.com or alex@ampedhq.com. Yeah, just flick us a message. We can guide you through the process. It's very, very simple. And yeah, hopefully kind of start you on that offshoring journey and finding you some talent that can really make a difference in your business, really make a difference to your team, and hopefully, you know, start you on a journey to greater profitability and more output. So yeah, so that's probably a bit of a shameless plug. It's the first one we've ever done. Everything's been kind of that little psychological undertone of like, hey, look at us.
Yeah.
Now we've just got a shameless plug in there. But appreciate you guys listening. Appreciate you taking the time. If you haven't listened to our other episodes, shoot back and listen to them. We've, you know, interviewed some incredible creators, leading influencers in Australia, franchisors who are blowing up creative businesses. And Alex and I have talked a bit about some pretty cool topics as well. If you don't want to go back, keep listening, subscribe, follow us on whatever platform that you listen to us on. Just appreciate you being here. And again, this is not by any means Alex and I's podcast. This is all Andrea, producer Andrea, and video editor Lester. You guys rock as well. And we will hopefully see you guys on the next podcast. Peace.
Sure.